Namaskar and welcome back to Media Scan, your weekend dose of headlines, controversies and perspectives. Thank you for making DD India the #1 English news network in the country. Mercury is steadily rising, but this week, whole of India celebrated Baishakhi, Bihu, Vishu and all those other spring festivals. However, the festivities were slightly marred by violence in a few states. There was much also on the geopolitical scenario. So, let's check out what made news. Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated the much-awaited Pradhan Mantri Sangrahalaya located in the premises of the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library in Delhi. This mega project is unique in many ways. It has more than 40 galleries showcasing memorabilia, contributions, challenges and the legacy of every Prime Minister since independence. PM Modi termed it a tribute to the power of the common Indian. Media reports said family members of the former Prime Ministers were awestruck by the grandeur and the scale of the museum. Congress President and the family, however, gave a no-show to the historic event. In the crucial virtual summit held earlier this week, Prime Minister Modi reiterated that India has always stood for peace and has urged the heads of Ukraine and Russia to resolve their differences with one-on-one dialogue. He also narrated how India handled the evacuation of more than 20,000 citizens from the conflict zones in Ukraine. PM Modi stressed on the robust Indo-US ties. India has made it clear that if any other country tries to tell us about issues happening within our territory, then we too have the right to comment on theirs. When US Secretary of State Antony Blinken remarked that they were monitoring certain incidents of human rights in India, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar retorted that we too are entitled to have views on their views. Jaishankar hinted that India understood what were the vote banks and lobbies operating behind the scenes and where this was coming from. Stone pelting, clashes and even gunshots marred the holy Ram Navami festival in half a dozen states. Media reports said this was the handiwork of anti-social elements who objected to the Shobha Yatras in their locality, while a few media platforms blamed it on provocation. The riots were followed by media reports of several houses being demolished in Khargone of Madhya Pradesh after identifying the stone pelters. The brutal rape and murder of a minor girl in Hashkhali in West Bengal will now be probed by the Central Bureau of Investigation. The incident sent shockwaves across the country as the minor was left bleeding to die in the open. It didn't end there. The main accused forcibly took away her dead body for cremation after threatening the hapless parents. As if this wasn't enough, Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee played down the crime, calling it could have been a love affair gone wrong. So those were some of the headlines you saw dominating the media space over the week. Viewers, in the run-up to the Modi-Biden talks and the ensuing 2+2 strategic dialogue, there was a lot of speculation, lots of ifs and buts in the media about what direction these talks were going to take and what could be the mood during the talks, considering the background of the Ukraine-Russia situation. However, when the talks got over, the overwhelming view that we could read or we could follow among the media commentators was that both the countries, both the democracies displayed exemplary maturity in their behavior, because what they really tried to do was either to sidestep or to play down the issues of divergence while trying to strengthen and build up on their issues of convergence. Do our experts believe such is the case? And if there were any sticking points, how do we negotiate them in the future? To understand and to discuss all this, I have two very special guests here with me this evening on Media Scan. Let me introduce former ambassador and author Anil Trigunayat. You have been following him on various television channels. His views are widely discussed. Today, he's joining us on Media Scan for the first time. He's also associated with the think tank, the Vivekanand International Foundation. Welcome and good evening to you, Ambassador Trigunayat. I hope we'll have a fruitful conversation, sir.
Thank you so much for having me here.
My second guest for the evening, noted journalist, editor of the Swarajya Mag. You have been following his comments, his stories for a long time. Let me introduce R Jagannathan. Welcome back to Media Scan, sir, and I hope you are known to say it as it is and we'll have the benefit of your perspective once again.
Thank you, Smita ji. I'm happy to be here.
So let's get on with the conversation. And I want to come to Ambassador Trigunayat here first. Sir, you must have been following, as we all are, the talks between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden. And then those were followed by the strategic 2+2 dialogue. In the outcome of all these talks, there have been different angles that were projected by the media. What, according to you, is the substantial outcome of this entire exercise? And do you believe that both the countries managed to steer clear of their divergences, their sticking points, the differences which we have on some issues, and managed to build up on whatever strengths we have? Where would you rate the relationship at this point, sir?
Well, I think that the relationship between India and US has been evolving in a very mature manner. And as you yourself mentioned, that both the leaders handled these problems in a very mature manner. That's something important. From US's perspective, while they have been hoping that India will continue to endorse their position, India has maintained a principled stand, and all the Quad member leaders have appreciated it. As you know, we have had the visits of Prime Minister of Japan and virtual summit between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Morrison of Australia. So all the Quad members basically have understood, and now this meeting, virtual summit between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden was called by President Biden.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's supposed to be only a 2+2. And as you know, we have these 2+2 meetings only with 4 or 5 countries.
Yes.
It started with Russia, Japan, and Australia, and US, and then Australia now. And so there are very few countries we have it. And this is the highest body that decides on various issues that are impacting on the relationship, how we go forward. And of course, from US's point of view, it is not only their preoccupation with European theater, but also with the Indo-Pacific theater. And that is what India has been trying to put together with them, that, you need to focus on this particular theater a little more. And that's what probably I believe that has been done. As far as position on...
So before we move ahead on the point, sir, if you remember, while we were having the Quad discussions, there were some very harsh comments from President Biden vis-a-vis India. However, we did not see any such comments this time. And so do you think there has been some understanding or realization of our stance in the Western world? And also, did Ukraine really cast a shadow on the talks, if at all?
No, let me say that Ukraine did not cast a shadow, but Ukraine was definitely on the horizon when these elections were held. And that was one of the most important external factor in this bilateral relationship. So that is true. But at the same time, President Biden, for his domestic constituency, says India has a shaky stand, and this is something else. But then India takes a holistic viewpoint, and that has been clarified many times to the Americans and in the international fora, including at the UN Security Council. So if they refuse to understand, India was very clear. This is our position. And it was not only because we have a global comprehensive strategic partnership with the US and a special and privileged strategic partnership with Russia, or for our own interests, but it is for the global peace and solidarity. That is what India stood for the UN Charter, for dialogue, for diplomacy, for peace. There was nothing wrong with that. The problem is that if you take a holistic picture, you will realize that there are no saints in this game. If Putin is to be accused of invasion, so is the Americans for fomenting this trouble to this extent. Nobody wanted to settle this score. So India takes that holistic position, and we have seen what they have done in the last 20 years in Iraq, Libya, elsewhere. So That's why I say there are no saints in the game.
Would you say that there is better realization of our position now or not?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. They do understand to what extent India can go. And of course, they themselves recognized that India has been providing humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, that it can be can help in achieving the peace or stopping Putin. I mean, those are the kind of things that have come from there, which shows that India today holds its ground in the International Committee of Nations.
So fine, that point is well taken, sir. But I just want to bring in Mr. Jagannathan here into the discussion. Jaggi sir, I was reading your comments on the remarks of Secretary Blinken when he spoke about the human rights situation, and subsequently, not harsh, but very measured and well-worded retort from our External Affairs Minister, Mr. S. Jaishankar. However, it was a little curious to read the heading in your assessment of the situation when you say that it's time to weaponize the human rights debate, for or against any position. If you could just explain what you really meant by that, and is this debate on the human rights becoming a big sticking point?
See, when you come to democracies, both sides need the other. I mean, I don't think any strategic expert anywhere in the world will say that US as a democracy and India as a democracy do not need each other. We need each other, and not only that, we know who the main threat will be in the coming couple of decades, which is largely northern neighbor, and of course our terrorist neighbor as well. So both the countries need each other. But within the context, both countries also have domestic constituencies.
Right.
The USA, like India, as a partner where we are a subservient partner, which helps them from the point of view of their own domestic politics, where they say, okay, this is an ally, we can tell them what to do, and they will do whatever we ask them to do. That is their domestic compulsion. In India's case, we don't want to be treated shabbily. So when the US, when I say weaponizes human rights, US uses human rights in order to bring people who do not agree with them fully in line. So they hold the threat of saying, we will hold you accountable for this and that and all kinds of things. So that you learn to kowtow to them rather than be treated as an equal partner. Which is why when you say that, which is why Ambassador, the MEA and Jaishankar very clearly said that, look, we have concerns about your human rights too. When you say weaponize, what he means is just like you hold a dagger and say that, okay, look, if you either be with us or you're against us. I mean, verbally that's what they're saying, even though the strategic experts know that actually you need each other, right? But the point is...
Minister Jaishankar, if I may interrupt you, sir. Minister Jaishankar also said very candidly that we know where it is coming from. So what do you think he meant by that?
See, that's where I think the Indo-US relationship has always been prickly. Because both the US, both the left and the right tend to be largely anti-India for various reasons. They have cultivated various lobbies, both in their own constituencies. They have the evangelical groups, then they have the left liberal lobby, and they have their mirror counterparts in India too, who supply them with a lot of dubious narratives, which they buy into because they don't know much.
So it is starkly political, is it?
Yeah, it is starkly political, and this lobby, I think they don't know better. They know only what our lobby with a vested interest in India feeds their lobby with a vested interest in their context. And this lobby actually makes it difficult for US administration to take a very sensible stand on where to stand with India. We know that human rights issues happen in India. There is no doubt about it. I don't think we want to say that everything is such Ram Rajya that nobody needs to worry about it.
Right.
But it's equally true in the US. So, but instead of understanding that we are grappling with diversities in both countries, where one incident that comes out of the ordinary and takes up a front page news is not what defines us. That is what Jaishankar was trying to say, that look, these things happen.
I have two queries here, sir. One is on the political question. We did see some political criticism within our own country also. The NCP chief said India's response was not up to the measure. We should have responded right there rather than speaking later. And also, this question of understanding the sensibilities, the diversities of a nation. How would you assess the situation from this standpoint?
Yeah, so two things. The fact that Mr. Pawar said that you should have said it there itself, I think that would have created an unnecessarily bigger headline that you actually had a clash right in front of each other. So coming and making your point for your domestic audience.
And that could have overshadowed the substantive outcome of
the fact that you had basically a good equation, you have a better understanding, you would have made it sound as though we were all at daggers drawn, which is not the case. And the other point is there are lobbies. There is no doubt about it that there are many lobbies that work against, that do not want India and US ever to get closer. And these lobbies are fed by various groups in the US and here, which have political agendas, which want to weaken our government and calling it highly, communal, this, that, which is not the case. In a country of 1.4 billion people, you will have people with diverse opinions. And the fact that a particular government has come to power does not, if you want to make it sound as though it is illegitimate by definition.
So can we say, Mr. Jagannathan, can we say that India's response, or rather the EAM's response, was measured and yet effective? Would you agree?
Yeah, yes. I think there was a pushback and it needed to say that, look, please treat this issue with nuance and don't just throwing human rights in our face every time we just have a shake of hands. We can also do the same, but we are not doing it because our larger relationship is more of that sense was conveyed by not getting into a scrap right in that first meeting with Blinken. And you said it later, where you say that, look, we also have our domestic politics to take care of. You have domestic politics to take care of.
So that's understood, sir. But can I just come back to Ambassador Trigunayat? Anil Trigunayat ji, I was just thinking, to move away from this human rights question, on which we might see more in the future. There is also this question of the energy security. And though this is not limited to, the just unconcluded 2+2 dialogue, but we did hear of it in Europe and at other platforms. And Minister Jaishankar was very clear in showing the mirror to the European nations about how, they have been making, trying to guilt trip us into this question of buying energy from Russia. But then Europe does many, many more times of it. And even in the midst of this conflict, they have not scaled down their purchase or dealings with Russia. So do you think in the coming days, this question of energy is going to be another big debate in geopolitical circles?
Well, Sudhanji, before I say, let me just touch base a little bit on the previous question that you asked, Mr. Jagannathan.
Yes, please.
This was what we are looking at is this has been a standard talking point for the Americans and the Western countries, especially the Europeans. Every time this is something that they think will raise it and it will bring down the morale of the Indians or something like that. That did not happen. Earlier, we used to discuss bilaterally, and this time it has again come up when both the ministers are there. So I think that India's response was absolutely correct. Secondly, we don't have to go very far. Their own agencies, human rights or other agencies, and the reports that NGOs that bring out, you just look at the very first violator of the human rights happens to be the United States of America. That is something. So we need to create our own dockets and present it to them. They just have a look inside, man, and then we will talk about it. So that can be taken care of this way. As far as energy security is concerned, we import about 85% of our energy.
Yes.
And the cost of it has gone up tremendously. We are not buying so much from Russia as yet. There is a possibility Russians are aiming at the Asian side to buy more of their oil. Chinese are moving away from Canada, from US, and trying to get entangled furthermore in the Russian energy. Many countries will do that. No country has actually agreed, except some European countries, to fully implement sanctions that were announced by the United States, which are illegal in law, basically, because they're unilateral sanctions. So we don't care about them. But practicality is different because they'll have an impact. Some of your companies will find it difficult to do business in the US and things like that if the secondary sanctions are imposed. So India pushed back very strongly, saying that we are hardly in an afternoon, whatever Europe uses, we do it in a month. So that is something that gives the perspective to it that the problem is in your country. countries because your dependencies on Russia are huge. Our dependencies are not huge. When I was in Moscow, we had the first time we had invested in Rosneft, taking 20% of their shares. And that is paid off many times. It is exchanged internationally. We are just buying hardly any oil, 1 to 2% maximum. But we keep the option open to buy from anywhere, wherever it is possible for us to do so. So I think that this will remain. Depends on how the Russia-Ukrainian conflict goes further. That will have a little more, because see, for 2 years at least, the Germans, the French, the Dutch and others cannot, their ministers, prime ministers have clearly mentioned that we cannot divest from the Russian energy. So if that is going to be the case, what face or hypocrisy is it that you accuse India of doing that?
So, Mr. Trigunayat, you have very kindly explained the whole situation regarding energy security and energy requirements to us, particularly in case of a country like ours, which is trying to achieve its potential in the international space. But how do you see this energy debate going further, sir? Because the conflict in Ukraine doesn't seem to be ending and things are becoming complicated.
Well, I think this will continue this way. As I said earlier, that I do not see Europe branching out completely from dependencies on Russia, at least for the next year and a half to 2 years. So if that is not happening, then until then you are safe. But at the same time, there are a lot of efforts are being made by all countries to branch off from the hydrocarbons and go into the renewables, nuclear energy and other. Like in this particular visit also, USA has agreed to set up 6 nuclear power plants in India, try to help in the clean energy partnership, the technologies and all. So gradually our ratio of the non-thermal energy, non-hydrocarbon based energies will also subside. And Russia knows it very well, that they'll also have to branch off because they cannot continue to depend on this forever. But for the time being, they know it very well. Secondly, we should not forget that we import about 10% of our energy requirements from the US. So US has to see whether they want to eat the eggs or kill the geese.
Fine. Fine. Your point is well taken, sir. But I believe I just have time enough to bringing one interesting angle to this whole debate before we wind up for the evening. And I want to come to Jagannathan ji on this. Mr. Jagannathan, there is a huge Indian diaspora in the US, even if we don't discuss about the Europe or other countries at this point, leave aside Australia or Japan. And, always in matters of geopolitics, in matters of one-on-one relationship, and even in the narrative, where I talk of the media discourse, this diaspora seems to be playing a significant and quite an influential role when it comes to people-to-people relationship in the two countries. Do you also think the diaspora has a role to play? Are they able to influence the narrative in any manner? And if yes, how?
Yeah, see, there are two things. One is, ever since the present government came to power in India, it has been able to tap into the large Indian diaspora and get them activated to work for better ties between the two countries and also in our own economic and national interests.
Yes.
Now, what has happened is that during the Trump years, actually that relationship was closer, because some Indian diaspora individuals were shifting towards Republican Party, whereas traditionally they have largely been with the Democrats. Okay, that created some opportunity for troublemakers in their establishment to use fault lines within our own groups, diaspora groups, to sort of bring in a stronger element caste to divide Indian diaspora itself, so that the power of the diaspora is reduced in their own domestic politics. So that's what they've been doing. And they have cultivated a lot of academics who are basically either India-phobic or Hindu-phobic, and they have created groups within the diaspora which will speak out against India all the time.
So this may look like smart politics from the standpoint of the US establishment, sir. But it is a sinister development for India, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Because what happens is, when you have a high economic power, you have the power to play these games, because you can say back the right kind of group and tell them, you go and fight against this guy. Whereas, see, we can't do the same in their politics. So they can do this, what you call smart politics, but we don't have the power yet, economic power yet, to play their game. So I think it will take some
so
while.
Very briefly, just very briefly, Mr. Jagannathan, what would you say the Indian people and the Indian government must go about it to, to try to reduce this game being played on us through our own people?
I think one part of the fault lies with us because we have not really explained what is happening in India in terms that the American public and our diaspora can understand, right?
Right.
So the only thing that gets played up is maybe an occasional thing that lynching that happens or some other communal riot that happens. It sounds as though that defines the whole of India. And we have not really explained what is happening here. We need to have a very strong public relations approach to the US, both to the general population and the diaspora, where we explain our things clearly and where they understand what is happening here in much greater nuance. That is where we have failed. I think that is what we need to do. Once we get our message and our narrative across in greater detail, I think the relationship will actually improve. So we haven't done our part of the job in this.
Perfect. Absolutely. Thank you for explaining that so well to us. But I am afraid on this point, I'll have to now express gratefulness to both of you gentlemen and say goodbye because we are just about, gotten over with the time that I had in hand this evening. So, Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, thank you very much for joining us for the first time, sir. And I look forward to having your opinion, your perspective more often on our show. Thank you very much.
With pleasure.
Also, Mr. Jagannathan, thank you for finally connecting back on Media Scan after a long gap. We have always benefited from your perspective and we hope to continue doing so in the coming episodes. Thank you, Mr. Jagannathan.
Thank you, Smita ji.
Viewers, one thing comes out very clearly from what we heard both our guests tell us, and that is while the governments are engaging very robustly, keeping in mind the realities, the diversities, etc., and also trying to strengthen on how to make our relationship better despite those divergences, there is a certain role that the media and the people of the two countries can play in bringing us together and have an equal and yet a strong relationship in the future. On that note, thank you very much for tuning back to Media Scan, and it's a wrap up on this evening's episode. But do keep watching DD India as we shall continue to scan the media for you. Good night.